Hi, and welcome to the She Geeks Out podcast, where we geek out about workplace inclusion and talk with brilliant humans doing great work, making the world a better and brighter place. I'm Rachel.
And I'm Felicia. So this week, we're really excited to welcome Aparna Rae to our podcast. Aparna is a writer, a speaker, an educator, and an entrepreneur. She has actually started 4 companies. Wow, that's a bit more than us. Although, I don't know, Rachel, you might be close behind. But in any case, Aparna does a ton of writing on topics like data, equity, systems change, and the future of work. We were so thrilled to have the chance to sit down with her and chat. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Aparna.
Yay.
All right. So our guest today is Aparna Rae. Hi, welcome, Aparna. So excited to have you on the pod with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. So we're just going to dive right on in. So I took a little bit of liberty of lifting some language from your website. So you are a self-described educator by training, innovator by choice, by chance, not choice, although maybe choice as well, and a disruptor by choice. And you work at the intersection of equity, data, and organizational and systems change. So we always love to start off with, what is your origin story?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I feel like, in my teens, I wanted to be a cross between Indiana Jones and a classroom teacher. And so, of course, I, at 19, went and worked on an archaeological dig and discovered that archaeology is actually really boring. You spend a lot of time.
Truth. The hat and whip was really it.
Yeah. You're just you're spending a lot of time in dirt. You find one coin after 40 hours of digging. It didn't feel worth it, even though that experience was actually really incredible. And then in 2006, I got into the classroom. I was a 4th grade teacher in West Chicago, and I realized that I didn't actually have the skills to work with my coworkers. And this is almost 20 years ago, when we weren't talking about race and racism and the fact that most classroom educators are white women, and you're teaching in environments where you have no lived experience. And I think you see Black and brown kids with such a deficit lens. And so I did what anybody who doesn't understand their life circumstance does, which is I went off to grad school and studied decolonizing pedagogy and really got into adult learning and realized that, holy crap, the ways in which we raise adults is not setting them up to be successful and impactful in their lives and their jobs. And yeah, I think since then it's been a bit of an entrepreneurial roller coaster. I've started 4 companies in the last 12, 13 years, 2 for-profits, 2 nonprofits. 3 of them are still around today. And yeah, I feel like what I do now almost is the pedagogy of work.
Well, let's get into that a little bit. The pedagogy of work. I kind of want to dig into this whole being a serial entrepreneur thing, because I feel like we can definitely relate to that. Maybe if we have time, we can dig into that. But let's talk a little bit about the pedagogy of work. A few years ago that you said that you stopped saying yes to clients who weren't interested in data-informed approaches. We can definitely relate to that as well. Would just love to hear your experience with that. Did you get any pushback, any behavior changes? And I would just love to hear about what your work is today.
Well, so, in 2020, when I started my firm, there were so few people that were using data-informed approaches to DE&I. And what I'll say, right, the caveat is big companies have had people analytics teams for a very long time, right? But when people think of DE&I, they're not really thinking about data. The evolution of DEI on the corporate side has been, employee resource groups going back to the 70s when Xerox started the very first one, and a lot of anti-bias, anti-harassment trainings that came about as a result of women and people of color entering the workforce en masse in the 70s and the 80s, right? And then on the academic side, there have been scholars who've been talking about anti-racism, social justice, decolonizing for a very, very long time. And these two kind of areas start to converge, and then we start to get these commercial superstars like Robin DiAngelo and Ibram Kendi and Nicole Hannah-Jones, and the flavor of what DE&I looks like changes pretty dramatically, and it starts to enter like sort of mainstream conversations, mainstream organizations. And but what is entering the mainstream is neither the nuanced conversations that are being had by academics, right, which have kind of like very limited real world applicability because you essentially need a graduate degree to like understand what white supremacy culture is, nor is it nor like is there clarity that I think Fortune 500 companies have had for decades, which is we're doing this to appease a certain subset of employees so they come to work and they add value and they innovate here inside of our organizations, right? Which was very much the case in the 70s, 80s, 90s, right? Like that relationship is clear. And so that's the caveat, right? When people think of DEI in the past decade, they're mostly talking about like employee resource groups, DEI committees. They're talking about anti-bias training. They're not really talking about like let's look at the data of it, like how our employees are experiencing this organization. And so when I started doing that work, you said, were there pushbacks? Holy moly, right? Like people were just like, well, we're not ready to do this work yet. Or they would say to me, I want to start with what's easy and approachable, or I want to start with what my employees are asking for. And over 5 years, I saw a lot of folks come back to us after they'd had failed engagements with other firms. And what was interesting to me is that the failed engagements came from corporate firms like Mercer, like Paradigm, Deloitte, as well as like the failed engagements were happening with like small shops, right? And I think the commonality was these organizations, these consultancies were offering their clients whatever the client asked for, rather than actually pushing back on the client saying, here's what we think you need based on what we're observing or what we're seeing in the data. And I would 100% make that same choice today, right? Like if somebody came to me and said, hey, like, do you want to do some trainings? I would say, no, I don't want to do some trainings because I know that that's actually like, A, it doesn't do anything, but B, like it can cause real harm to employees from marginalized backgrounds.
Yeah, no, thank you for elaborating on that because I think, it certainly resonates with what we've experienced in our approach as well. We've had very similar experiences where we talk about our sort of like initial conversations with clients as almost like business therapy because they'll come and say, we want this. And then we're like, well, what I'm hearing is you actually need something totally different. And then it's a whole
Hmm.
back and forth of are they open to that or not? And I think certainly in the time frame where you initially sort of put this out there, the 2020, 2021, it was so wild in terms of everyone was just looking to do something. And so I imagine there was quite a spread of how clients were reacting to that. But when you're thinking about data, if we drill a little bit deeper, what would you say like data informed equity then would mean to you, or what has that looked like for you in your work?
Yeah. So I think, like fundamentally is what informs your what informs your approach to equity, right? I think for a lot of people, what informs their approach to equity is just rhetoric. It's just words, right? And I think that data offers accountability. So we're not just having conversations based on your feelings. I mean, feelings are fine, feelings are valid, but I see it happen, and I'm sure you all have seen this happen as well, as people are just kind of in their feelings and in their assumptions as well around what employees need or what community needs. And so for me, this approach isn't just like about numbers. I would say my approach has been what's called a warm data approach, which is about seeing patterns through relationships and stories and hard data. And I'll give you an example of that, right? One of my least favorite questions that companies ask on surveys, you've seen it too. It's like, do you feel a sense of belonging at XYZ organization? Right? What the heck does that mean? Has the organization ever actually described what constitutes a sense of belonging? Is it that when I disagree, the conversation is respectful? Is it that I'm paid a living wage? Is it that I have a friend at work. Like, what is that? What does belonging really constitute? We don't actually ever tell people how we envision belonging. We just ask this question that, by the way, also doesn't make sense to anybody that isn't in the jargon of DEI or the jargon of employee experience. And so people will say, well, I'm not being wildly oppressed, so hence I must feel a sense of belonging. And then companies take that and they're like, well, 87% of our employees feel like they have a sense of belonging here. Therefore, this is a great place to work. Meanwhile, it's a hella toxic place to work. Right. And so I think data actually allows us to have way more nuance. And and I will also say that the companies that are the worst offenders are the ones that consider themselves like a data-driven organization. They're the ones that like you present something that doesn't meet their assumptions, and they'll be like so wildly embarrassed and angry. They're like, how could this be true? We're so amazing. And I'm like, but you asking a question about whether people feel a sense of belonging doesn't make you amazing because you've never actually defined what belonging is or what psychological safety is. So that's kind of what I would say like data informed equity means to me.
I have so many questions.
Yeah. Ask away.
I'm just so curious because in hearing you, I've over the past few years, I've been thinking a lot about how we approach this work, right? Because we do DEI training, so a lot of what you're talking about is like, we try to meet our clients where they're at and try to give them what they are asking for in a way that feels meaningful. And when I think about it, I'm like, are we making systemic change?
Yeah.
Or is this more of an individual, like, okay, we're affecting one person and there's a ripple effect. We're affecting a handful of people and there's a ripple effect. Do
Yeah.
you think that there is some validity to that approach? And it's okay if you're like if you're like, actually no, your work is trash, like that's okay. This is honesty. We love it. But would love to just get your thoughts on like, is there a nuance there?
I think there is a nuance there, right? And the nuance is what outcomes are we trying to achieve by using education as a tool, right? And I think what's happened is that the tools have become synonymous with the work, but the tools are not the work. The tools are not the work.
Yes, yes. We actually say that too. I mean, Felicia, obviously, we say the work isn't the workshop, right? It's like
Yeah.
exactly that. It's okay.
Yeah.
What are you going to do with that information
Yeah,
when
it's
you?
one of our favorite things to say, sort of company wide, because so many clients think, oh, we'll do the workshop, check the box, everything is
Yeah.
fixed. And then, that's obviously not the reality at
Yeah.
all. So we constantly say that. It's one of the phrases I probably say the most with clients because I'm like, yes, we'll do work together for sure. So I'm not discounting that. But the real work happens when we leave, when we shut the computer down, we
Mhm.
go away, when we, exit the space. And that's a real for some organizations, they get it and they've been doing the work and they understand that. Other organizations, to your point, they think the tool is the end game or the end
Yeah.
goal, and it's actually not at all true. And I do think, to your point earlier about I like that you kind of referenced the history of this work because I do agree that I think a lot of people feel like this just came out in the last 5 years. Like DEI came up and was
Oh
created
my
in the
gosh.
last 5 years.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. And there is a
Mhm.
long history to it. And I guess like with that in mind, I am curious, like, what do you think the state of DEI writ large is today? Like, do you think it's like I feel like there's just been so many thought pieces, and of course we have our opinions too, but is it dead? Is it evolving? Is it on
Yeah.
hiatus? Is it taking a mid-season break? Like, what are your thoughts on
Mm.
that?
Oof. Who really knows?
Which
I will
totally
say
fair
that,
answer.
right?
Like,
Who
give us
really
all the
knows?
answers, but no one has answers.
Nobody has answers. I feel like this moment is definitely separating the wheat from the chaff, right? And that's actually really good. And I have been very clear throughout my career, and I would say very consistent, um, in just saying that like DEI is not anti-racism work. DEI is not social justice work. DEI is a corporate philosophy for appeasing employees and creating value for the company. right? That is what it is. Now, in this moment, what we're seeing is because the moral standard no longer calls for supporting people and leveling the field, we're seeing people actually speak on what their real values are, right? And folks are so surprised. I think yesterday in Seattle, Microsoft had a company meeting or a conference, and there was an employee who's a part of, no Azure for apartheid, who disrupted the meeting. And I heard from a couple of friends who were physically there, and they said, I'm really disappointed that Satya Nadella didn't say anything, right? The disruptive employee was removed and they carried on. And then at some point, Elon Musk made an appearance, and they were like, and I was just so surprised, like, why was Elon a part of this conversation? And I said, because the reality is that all of these people know each other and they're in solidarity with each other. Who they're not in solidarity with is us. And the sooner that we realize that, the better we will be at evolving our practices so that we have a shot at not just preserving, fairness and dignity and safety in workplaces, but also preserving some semblance of democracy. And so, is DEI dead? No, I think what's dead is our misguided belief that corporations are our friends.
Word, as I used to say a lot in my youth. Yeah, I mean, that is spot on. And relatedly, I mean, one of the questions that we had for you too is, we are living in a time under an authoritarian regime, right? Like this guy
Yeah.
and these guys are doing
Mhm.
so much to disrupt our current way of life, for better or worse. Who knows how it will
Yeah.
shake out in the end. But in this time, do you have any thoughts on, on how we all can sort of show up in these still capitalist corporate societies in a way that feels authentic and good and still doing the work?
Oh, that's a really hard question, right? Because I think fundamentally, in a moment like this, we are having to make a decision in between our livelihoods and acting with integrity. And the fewer people, and these are not mutually exclusive, they don't have to be mutually exclusive, but somewhere along the way, we really lost the plot on political education that was kind of key in the 60s and the 70s, right? When I was coming into the workforce, by virtue of being a public school teacher, I was in the union, and there were some expectations around being involved in your teachers' union. And like the Chicago Teachers Union is super, super active, right? Like they're going on strike every other year and actually winning a lot for students and for families and for communities. And I know that they are also political organizations. I know not everybody loves the ways in which teachers unions behave, but at the end of the day, when you're part of a union, when you're part of labor that's organized, you receive a kind of political education that's just really missing right now. And what it's done is we've created the sense, or rather, I think we've like accepted that having awareness equals taking action. And liberals are guilty of that, I think, far more than conservatives are, right? We love to sit on our pedestal and use our like jargony language of social justice and honestly weaponize it while doing the bare minimum or actually literally nothing at all. And so, yeah, I think this moment is, like, do what you need to do to stay employed, but also get a political education and don't expect it from people of color or from queer and trans folks, right? Like, it's not their responsibility to be educating the rest of us. And show up, literally show up. It's, I think it's going to be imperative that everybody builds their activist muscle. And a lot of that just is about like creative problem solving.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're just like aggressively nodding behind the screens here because, yes, agree with everything you're saying. Could probably spend hours just going down that pathway
Yeah.
for sure. I have so many thoughts and fields that I talk a lot about in therapy and with my community as well. But I think that in terms of this moment in time, we've talked a little bit about your career already and kind of how you've been doing your work and how you've approached it. And a lot of it's been in terms of kind of like bridging this gap between what employees want and need and what organizations want and need and what they can actually do or provide or what they are able to do or want and all that. And I guess my question is, do you have any examples or even if it's a generic example of an organization that is approaching this moment in time in terms of the cultural shifts, the societal shifts, the regimes that we're getting under? Any examples of organizations that are handling it well or that are sort of riding the waves in a way that's not super harmful? Or maybe on the flip side, are there any cautionary tales that you've seen where it's been the opposite? It's like, oh, this company just totally destroyed themselves because of how they approached what's going on right now.
Mm, yeah, I think this like the point of like are companies totally destroying themselves? We have to really ask like what is being destroyed,
Shareholder
right?
value, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the truth is that white supremacy is good for business. It's actually really good for business, and the data theater that I think DEI practitioners perform, that HR people and culture folks perform, it only adds to that. Who is doing it well? I think that I don't want to say names, right? But I
Sure.
think
Yeah.
that the companies that are doing it well are the ones where the leadership is aligned and values labor. And valuing labor isn't just about creating spaces for people to whine, right? Which is, I think, like a lot of the ERG type spaces have just become like a place for people to come and complain, right? Valuing labor is about making sure that people are paid well. It's about making sure that they have the benefits that allow them to come to work and be present and safe at work. And the companies that are going to ride this well are the ones that fundamentally value labor, right? And when you look across the ecosystem, it doesn't matter if you're a philanthropic organization or you're a nonprofit or you're, a private company or a startup. When you understand what it means to value labor, it becomes really clear to see who is gonna win. And I think by win, I mean like who is gonna survive sustainably into the future. It's gonna be companies that value labor, that where the leadership fundamentally cares about the humanity of their workers, regardless of whether they're in construction or forestry or retail or tech, right? Like the industry doesn't matter. What matters is I see you as a full person. And to the best of my ability, I'm going to make sure that you come into work and know that your job comes with safety, dignity, and that we care
So you're ta
deeply for
so you're ta so you're talking about Costco.
I am talking about Costco. Correct. I am
And
talking about Costco,
and I
which
say that
happens, and I live in the suburb that Costco is from.
amazing. I know, yeah, I feel I'm actually like it's a couple of years into my Costco journey. It's very exciting, and I love it so much, and so it was great to see that, and I'm glad that you mentioned that because as you were saying that, I was thinking about, a previous guest that we had on, Catherine Bracy, who talked about VCs, and there just seems to be a fundamental, like, just a disconnect. Like, you cannot have a VC-backed company where,
Mhm.
like, shareholders and have a company that also cares about labor. Like, it just seems like the 2 are diametrically opposed.
Right, because what are the goals? Right, and so I think you think about Costco, and Costco, has become famous, I think, recently for standing up in support of DE&I. But even when I was in my 20s, I remember being at a conference and hearing somebody talk about how Costco promotes people and how Costco invests in sending their employees that started on the floor to MBA school, to what have you, right? So that they can step into leadership roles, and that the vast majority of their senior leaders were people that started on the floor, right? They're not passing lemons across Fortune 500 companies. They are grooming their own leadership. And Costco is not the only one. Like, you look at Patagonia. They were sending nannies with their senior executives who were traveling for work with small kids 10 years ago. They were doing that 10 years ago. They were allowing moms to ship breast milk back to their homes when they were traveling for work 10 plus years ago. So we know that there are folks that are doing this, that do it well, and they're not trillion-dollar companies, right? Patagonia is selling me a fleece that I'm going to wear until the ends of time. I'm not buying a new fleece every 6 months when the fleece fashion changes,
Yeah.
because their
Well,
product
and they're
is
also
that well
they're
made.
not building their fleeces to disintegrate unrealistically and
Exactly.
become obsolete every year. So you have to invest in a new one every year, Apple.
Right? So unless I gain a lot of weight and I no longer fit into my fleece, there's no reason for me to buy a new fleece. And and I think that's just kind of worth paying attention to, is that you can't scale to the size of an Amazon without engaging in horribly extractive practices. And by the way, like, our generation's Amazon was Walmart, right? Like, we all grew up hearing about and actually watching Walmart decimate local grocery stores, right? And not just one store, not just one grocery store, right? But possibly a dozen stores in a community that were replaced by Walmart. We saw that, right? Like, we watched Walmart have all of these lawsuits around their hiring practices. And the fact today is that the majority of the food stamp recipients in any geography where Walmart operates are Walmart employees.
Yeah, no, it's such a good point. And, as we were kind of exploring this, what also came to my mind was what I've been calling like the backlash to the Great Resignation. Because we had the Great Resignation a few years back. What was that, 2021 ish, I want to say. And that's when we really saw for the first time in a long time, and maybe for the first time in many industries, especially in tech, I think there was such a shift of power to the workers. And what we're seeing now, in addition to everything else that we've been talking about, is I do think in large part a corporate reaction to basically yanking this power back and saying, "Oh no, you thought?
Mhm.
Never mind." And so, it's again, this is there's obviously all these other issues and societal shifts happening, but just it's so interesting to think about, from a company perspective or a corporate perspective, like what are the end goals and how can
Mhm.
we do the least amount of harm by also supporting our people? And,
Yeah,
Walmart is just going to look at that bottom dollar all day, every day. And to your last point is so well taken around the welfare of their own employees. And at
yeah,
the same time, like, but if they just didn't make, a couple extra decimal points on their balance sheet, they would probably be in such a different position. But it's just so disgusting, like how gross and capitalistic our society has become in these ways. But
yeah,
there are some companies out there, there are people out there who want to shift this, but it is challenging because that's just the way the society is built. And I know that's where a lot of folks in these fields, especially, like, there's a lot of difference of opinion around, like, do we work within the system to try to change it?
yeah,
We just completely break the system apart. And I feel like this moment's such an interesting moment from that angle only because it's like, well, the choice may actually not be in our hands anymore. So we'll see what it looks like to do both because we're experiencing all of it happening all at once. So
yeah. So I think here's what's interesting. And last year, when I took the year off, right, I was on a sabbatical. I started reading very differently, because when you're working 60 hours a week, you don't actually read for pleasure. You read because you have to for work. You're reading reports, you're reading books that, your client is doing a book club, and you have that book to read. I read two books that I so highly recommend to your audience, and like to you and to anybody who's listening. And the first one is called Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber, who famously wrote The Dawn of Everything. And he is sadly no longer alive because otherwise he would be writing more incredible books. And the second is a newer book. It's called Moral Ambition by Rutger Bregman. And, Rutger Bregman actually references David Graeber's work pretty heavily in his book. And what researchers are clear on is that most people in the Western world don't see their work as having a positive impact on the world. And somewhere around, I think like 50% of Harvard grads go into either finance or management consulting. And what a colossal waste of talent. What a colossal waste of talent. I went from doing some of my most impactful work in my 20s and early 30s to what? Like I became a management consultant in my late 30s, right? And I think, people really have to square off what's happening because it's not just a talent drain away from doing impactful work. It's a talent drain that's causing a loss of democracy the world over. And that I think is a point that, we can like talk about like DEI and company culture all day, every day, and like what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing. But I think that like if we zoom up, above the trees, what's really clear is that having healthy workplace cultures is actually key to being in a state of democracy. And when you look around the world, there's no country that has a democracy that we envy that doesn't also have incredible work-life balance, that doesn't also have paid family and medical leave, that doesn't also have universal health care, right? And of course, a lot of it's being subsidized by cheap labor in the global south, and that's a different conversation to have, right? But when you look at countries that are operating within a high degree of democracy, which America is not. America has never been a democracy, right? At the very most, it's a republic. They have fundamentally good workplaces, right? They're not countries where you're like, oh, what are like the 5 companies that are doing good? No, they probably have like, what are the 5 companies that are shit and everybody else is actually doing pretty well.
Yeah, and it makes me wanna jump a little bit around to a question that I've been thinking so much about, which is we're in this world with AI, right? So you're talking about, like, human value, and I've been thinking a lot about this lately. It seems to me like this is the wet dream of corporate leaders is AI. Like, to have the robots take over because ultimately this country was founded on slavery. And, like, this is just what they want. Like, they want slave labor, and if they can get it through robots, they don't have to deal with the messy humans and the
Yeah.
dignity of work and all of that. So, like, how do we like, when we think about the future,
Yeah.
what are we optimistic?
We are. I think we
Good.
are because look, people are worried about robots taking over our jobs. No, they're not going to take, right? Like they're not going to take over our jobs because I don't fundamentally see robots today being capable of doing complex thinking that humans do without actually thinking, right?
But today, though, Aparna, like, today, but, like,
Sure. I mean,
it's
are
in
we
its
going to
infant
approach the singularity? Maybe.
maybe. Just
Right. Okay. So look, I think this is a really deep philosophical conversation about like how is technology going to shift how we are in this world, right? But today, look at self-driving cars and they are clunky. Something that a 16-year-old does is licensed to do without getting into accidents every week or every month or every year. Cars cannot do that. Cars cannot do that. We get into our cars every single day. We drive. Like, we're not getting into accidents. I mean, of course, there are lots of car accidents happening all the time, but we do it on kind of an autopilot that the autopilot is not capable of, right? So I think the thing that we have to start talking about and start solving for is how are we designing technologies that remove burdens for humans rather than technology that's looking to replace humans. Because I don't fundamentally think that technology that replaces humans is going to be additive for our mental and emotional well-being. I don't think that that technology is going to be additive for dealing with global climate change, which we don't even call it climate change anymore. We now have started calling it the climate crisis, right? Because it is well and truly a crisis. So, yeah. And I think the faster we're able to get to a place where we can deeply value humanity, the faster we're going to be able to push back against these vulture technologies.
I hope you're right. I'm not optimistic, but I hope you're right.
I know. Let's all cross our fingers and send a prayer up or down or wherever you send your thoughts and feels.
And
But
thank you, Aparna, for letting me go down that road with you.
Yeah, of course.
yeah, I mean, my 2 cents I'll just throw in really quickly is I completely agree with what you said, Aparna, and I think that's my fear is that I think the people who are in these positions of power or driving this race towards the singularity or AI or whatever it is that you want to call it aren't thinking about it in the way that you and we are thinking about it. They are thinking about it, I fear, in the sense of this will replace humans. I'm in my
Mm,
boat, and Rachel knows this, I talk a lot about it, is I'm always like, we need to be using these robots and AI and technology to do all the crap work that we don't want to do so we can create art
yeah.
and music and think and dream and be, be
Hmm.
humans. But what's happening is the technology is doing it for us, and that's not the way it should be. But so far, these few people in power seem to be okay with that. So anyway, that's like my own 2 cent rant that I'll add in. But
Well, the people in positions of power are always going to be okay with anything that creates like sort of shareholder value, right? Like that enriches them. I think the where I personally feel challenged is by people thinking ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot is so cool because now you're having it write your emails, right? Or you're having it create your absolutely shitty LinkedIn content. I mean, the garbage that I see on a platform that was so beloved to me even 5 years ago, I'm like, nobody gives a shit about your shitty content on LinkedIn, but everybody's out there trying to secure their bag, right? And they see becoming thought leaders and influencers as a pathway to that. But here's the thing, like real thought leaders and influencers are not using AI to create their content because they know it's not great, right? But I mean, we just have to, this is a genie. Here's what I'll say. This is a genie that I do think we can put back in the bottle, right? I think it's harder for us to do away with canned beverages. We've had them for such a long time, and the idea that we would live without canned beverages feels harder. But can I imagine a past where I was thriving without Claude? 100%. Yeah, it was like 3 years ago, right? It was only 3 years ago. So I do think, and a lot of technologists will say like that my thinking is incompatible with the reality that we're in. But I do think that these are some of these things we put it back in the bottle. We don't need it. Also, you don't need to use AI to draft an email to your coworker at the cost of 80 bottles of water's equivalent of energy. Why?
Yeah.
yeah, totally agree. I mean, again, I don't even know if we talked too much about this, Rachel, but this is a pet peeve of mine where I start going off about the state of our education system and critical thinking. And I've seen just in my own lived experience such a shift in how people understand things because there's such a reliance on AI. So
I mean,
100%.
there's just such a big reliance on technology, and I've been on Substack lately a lot, and I just find that like that is a breath of fresh air of a space where people are really writing from their
Yeah.
hearts, and I haven't seen it really anywhere else like I do there.
Hmm. Yeah.
This might be a good tie-in to one of our other questions that we wanted to touch on with you. So speaking of LinkedIn, our favorite place to hate as practitioners and entrepreneurs and business owners and
Yeah.
people in this world, your reports on LinkedIn as we are. And so you had a Forbes article called Where DEI Went Wrong and What Must Happen Next from March of this year,
Hmm.
kind of viral on LinkedIn and maybe outside of LinkedIn
Hmm.
as well. And so just curious if you could maybe speak a little bit more about, kind of what you presented in the article, maybe why it touched a nerve for some folks, and have
Oh
your
my
thoughts
gosh.
on it all since March. I know it was like a loaded question for you. So
Yeah. Oof. So I don't even know if it was the article that touched a nerve, but the former chief diversity officer of Uber wrote a really scathing review of the piece. And that is what went viral. And look, I think corporate DEI was never going to be the solution for why work doesn't work well, right? It was never going to be the solution for why we have such gross inequity in our world of work. And I think just this morning, like Google announced a $50 million settlement with 4,000 Black employees for wage discrimination. DEI was not going to solve for that. And I think that part of why it went viral is it held up a mirror to a community of practitioners that feel so entitled to making their livelihoods from a set of practices that are harmful while believing that their work is necessary and good.
yeah, I mean, oof, if we only had another hour to dig into this further with you, because I hear you and I appreciate it. And it was very interesting as sort of someone in the space, but not directly involved, of course, to see the discourse go down on LinkedIn,
Hmm.
especially, and the back and
Yeah.
there. And I think again, it's a larger conversation, but I do think it speaks a little bit to what we've sort of touched on a little bit already throughout this conversation around DEI as an industry, right? Because it's not just
Yeah.
thoughts and feels, it's not just about the
Hmm.
data, it's not just about the storytelling. It is an
Yeah.
industry, and in a lot of ways, even though it has been around for a while, as we know and we've spoken to, I do think, especially in 2020, the doors opened, and so it changed dramatically, literally overnight.
Hmm.
And that's had long-lasting repercussions, and there's been a lot of just it's not like other places or other spaces rather where, there's I don't wanna call them, like, guidelines or rules, but, like, there's less bumpers to it than perhaps you might find in other for-profit industries where there are ways to sort of allow for how we talk about this. How do we not have harm? How do we, kind of make sure that what we're doing is going to be impactful and not hurtful to the people that we're trying to help. And so anyway, that's a whole other conversation, but I can imagine, and I saw it in real life, so I don't even have to imagine that this really really
Well,
exposed
I think
a lot of that for people. So
it was a lot like having conversations, I think, with people that work in philanthropy or in nonprofits, right? Like the work that you're doing fundamentally, right? Like if you work in ed reform, I don't know. I mean, I struggle to have respect for you in this day and age. Like you've decimated the public education system and pulled resources away into all varieties of like charters and hybrids and right. And but you think you're doing God's work. And I think that's how a lot of DEI practitioners are, right? Like it's very similar to you think you're doing God's work, but what you're actually doing lacks nuance. And by the way, like you also don't have skills. And that's something that I've seen across the board. I'm like, what is it? What is your domain expertise? Is it adult learning? Is it people analytics? Is it strategy? Or are you putting together a hodgepodge of things and delivering a training, which you kind of do on repeat again and again? And I've seen so many practitioners, it drives me wild, who are just like, well, I'm gonna milk it while it's good. And I'm like, well, that's the same thinking that people in finance have. And like, look, we got like the housing crisis and millions of people couldn't retire. And we had seniors working at Walmart. So, I mean, I guess we can extrapolate the impact. And now we have, right? Like now we see what doing that kind of work has done, where I don't know, like, has racial resentment been this high since the 50s? Maybe not. Like we are seeing the impact of bad programming in this massive overcorrection where even the white folks that we think are our allies, they've been burned and they're not showing up.
Yeah.
They're not showing up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. I think there's a lot of shame baked into what was being discussed at the time, and there's a lot of not accepting, not there was a lot of not grace for people making mistakes and learning from them and all.
Yeah.
It was a wild time, and to me, it speaks to just power dynamics and power shifts and how that happened and just, the push-pull of it and how a lot of it is toxic and can be in both directions. And I know that you had talked a bit about workforce trends for, 2025, which how is it half over basically? I'm getting there
We
anyway.
don't know.
I
Yeah.
don't time, what is it? Just would love to sort of hear what your thoughts are. You mentioned mental health, disability justice, working across difference, class solidarity, more organizing. Do you think that there are any changes or shifts that you're seeing?
I would double down on all of it. I
Love
would double down on all of it. And I think if there's anything that I would add to it is we really have to protect queer and trans people in a
yeah.
way that we haven't, thought about protecting them. I mean, of course, the conversation about immigrants is ever present because Americans love to hate on immigrants going back hundreds of years, right? Immigrants are always like the boogie person. And, so I think for me as an immigrant who only recently naturalized as a US citizen, that conversation is, and the challenges there are really clear, right? I think we're really clear that CBP officers, ICE, law enforcement of any kind isn't our friend. But I think if there's one thing that I would add is for companies to really be paying attention to the lives and safety of their current trans employees, right? Like, please don't send your employees to conferences in Florida and Texas and other states where they risk being arrested, right? Like, don't send them to international conferences where they may actually have issues coming back into the country. Like, I'm not even worried about somebody going to Spain. I'm worried about them being able to come back into the country, right? And I think that pregnant women, like, that's right. Like, how are we thinking about and caring for people who are bringing new life into this world in an environment that is keeping brain dead pregnant mothers on life support against the wishes of their family, right? And jailing healthcare providers. And so I think like we have to really double down, and organizing gets us there. Because I think, I said earlier in our conversation, the CEOs, they're organized. They're organized. They hang out with each other. They're on the same page. And they tell us as much. I think, in probably at the end of 21, when I think people were still high off of like the meaty DEI contracts. I think Jamie Dimon was the one who said something like, workers have gotten too much power in the last 2 years, and we have to put an end to it, right? Like, and there was another CEO who had said something like, until workers feel pain, they're not going to get back in line. And they're having these conversations, and we're the ones that we're not.
That's right. We're living in fear.
We're living in fear, and we're also too busy, hoarding ourselves. Or I think, in the last couple of years, and I'm guilty of it as well. Like my partner and I have been talking for many years about like, could we retire early? And I would love
Yeah.
to not be working when I'm 70 years old. Like, I wanna live and enjoy my life when my body still feels good.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna,
or just do things that you care about. Right? Like,
right?
we should be living that way now can we do things that we care about that feel good to us? But no, we can't because we have to make sure that we have health insurance and that we can pay the rent or the mortgage or whatever, and, like, God forbid any of us have kids and have that
Yeah.
expense, you know?
And I don't have kids, and I don't have kids for that reason
Same.
because holy moly, like, who's going to take care of my kids?
Seriously.
You know?
We are childless cat ladies here. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
I prefer the
same.
term child-free myself, but
child-free cat ladies with my cat literally
Child-free
sitting
cat
right
lady
next to us.
reporting. Yeah, and yeah, so I think, like we need to deeply be in solidarity with each other. And yeah, and I hope that people realize that hustle culture and starting a business and being an entrepreneur and like selling our friends things it's not going to get us there.
See, that's for the next conversation.
Now, we could probably keep talking, but we do want to respect
Yeah.
time. Even though it is a social construct, but we're still respecting it for the time being. So, what's next for you as we start to wrap up? I know it's also another loaded question, but anything coming up for you that you're excited about or that you'd like to share?
Oh, well, I have been collaborating with some smart people at the risk of maybe perpetually being unemployed or underemployed. But I'm really, looking forward to collaborating with folks who are interested in building a future of work that's grounded in safety and dignity and in care. That's kind of where I have been putting my energy for the last couple of months as I've come back from sabbatical. And yeah, I want to work with people and companies that want to make that vision a reality, right? And for us to, yeah, I just think that we deserve so much more than what we have. And I want to be a part of making that possible.
Same
Yeah,
with you. We
that's
support
it.
that. We support that. And did we miss anything that you wanted to mention before we No?
So,
We could have totally another I could literally just have a conversation with you on the future of work too. So, like, that might have to be an offline conversation at some point. I don't know. And then where can people find you if they want to learn more?
they can find me at aparnarae.com. They can find me on LinkedIn. I guess they can find me on other social platforms, but I have to be honest, I'm not particularly responsive outside of email and LinkedIn, and that's just me showing my age.
Well, boundaries. I mean,
Boundary.
Yeah. Don't DM me on Facebook. I don't check it.
great.
We all
You know,
can't be
listeners?
we cannot all be everything everywhere all at once, you know?
You- Do you guys remember that movie? I think it was maybe Love Actually, where Drew Barrymore is like has a crush on this guy, and she's telling her friend about the challenges of dating. And I think this must be like the early or mid 2000s, where she's like, I left him a voicemail, and then he sent me a text message, and then he, like AOL'd me, and then I, texted him back, and then he left me. And now I just feel like we've added like TikTok and Blue Sky, and some of us are still on X, and right. I'm just like, how many? And well, there's like Signal if you're an organizer, but there's also WhatsApp if you're brown,
And Telegram.
oh
And
my
Discord.
god,
And
and
Reddit.
Discord and Reddit. Oh yeah, right. Can't forget Reddit, right? I'm just like, how many things am I supposed to check every day, but while also being a productive member of society?
Right.
And
It's not
so,
possible. It's really, yeah.
That's it.
if you're looking for me, you can find me on LinkedIn or via email, or you can send a pigeon, and that's
Love that.
it.
I love that. We're gonna send you a pigeon. Thank you so
Well,
much.
now I gotta go down a whole rabbit hole of raising pigeons to send to people. Anyway. Thank you so much, Aparna. This has been a really thoughtful and deep conversation. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
We did it! Oh, such a great conversation with Aparna. We're so happy to have her on. We hope you enjoyed listening to this interview as much as we enjoyed the conversation.
Yep, absolutely. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to rate, share, and subscribe. It makes a huge difference in the reach of this podcast and, by extension, this work. You can also visit us on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and sign up for our newsletter at inclusiongeeks.com/newsletter to stay up to date on all things Inclusion Geeks. Stay geeky.
Bye!